Alrighty, folks. At this time, I'm going to bring to the program. He's a New York Times bestseller, covered NASCAR. He's probably the face of covering the SEC now. You can catch him on SEC Nation. He was telling us it's kind of like the SEC version of College Game Day on Saturdays, and then he is with Ryan McGee hosting Marty and McGee every single Saturday morning. The one, the only Mr. Marty Smith from ESPN. Marty, are we going to have a Marty party this afternoon, my friend? Because it is so awesome to talk with you, buddy. How are you?
Crank up the Marty party. I'm great, man. We're a couple weeks into football season here. We're well into the NASCAR playoffs now, as you guys know well. I'll be fascinated to see how that ends up unfolding and transpiring and who ends up lifting that trophy at the end. Denny's got a lot of momentum right now as we speak. I don't know when y'all are planning to put this out, but he just has a unique confidence right now. He's always had talent. He's always been had great diversity in his skill set as a driver in terms of feedback to the crew chief, in terms of being able to negotiate a bunch of different types of racetracks and all those things. But there's just a moxie in him that seems very authentic right now to me.
It definitely feels like he's different this year. I don't know what it is, but I'm with you there. But I want to, before we dive into this book, Sideline CEO, Leadership Principles from Championship Coaches. I'm about a fourth of the way in. Fantastic book. I've already learned so much. But I want to dive into some sports that you've been covering over the past 20 or so years. You started with covering NASCAR. Now you're covering mainly college football and college basketball. What's the biggest difference for you when you're transitioning from covering just NASCAR to now covering college football and college basketball?
The amount of names. When you cover the Cup Series and Xfinity, I still call it Busch. I'm so old. But when you cover, those same, let's call it 50, 60 people consistently, and you're out there on the road with those same people consistently, you build these personal relationships and you build this muscle memory that makes the names very simple. But when you're doing college football and college basketball, two sports where the turnover is so dramatic on an annual basis and there's so many teams, that becomes a bit of a challenge. I mean, if this is full disclosure, I've done college basketball games the day after the national championship in football, and I got to the game and was feverishly studying during shoot-around the names on the roster, because it's like, all right, I haven't had enough time to be well enough prepared yet. And so ultimately, to me, that was the biggest transition. But you guys know, going back to when I did sort of transition more towards other sports from racing, I had done racing at that point from 1998 through 2014 almost exclusively. There was a one-off maybe every year here and there in the NFL or college football or Cam Newton over here or Nick Saban over there. But I was a NASCAR guy. So everybody knew me, and it's where I had sort of gotten my chops. So I get home from the last race of the 2014 season at Homestead Miami Speedway, and I had basically been gone for 20 consecutive weeks at that time, because ESPN at that time had the second half of the broadcast season. My wife had been a single mother basically during that time, and we had 8, 5, and 2 at home. So I get home from Homestead. I walk into the house. She's basically got tears in her eyes. I'm all gung-ho to be super dad. And she's like, dude, I just need you home, man. I need you home. I've been alone. And I was like, don't worry. My contract doesn't start till January 1st. I'm here and yours and present for the next 6 weeks. No sooner do I sit down on the couch and open up my phone, I have an email from a gentleman named Lee Fitting, who used to be the executive producer of College Game Day. And he said to me, start studying, son. Your passion belongs in college football, and I'm going to embed you with one of the 4 teams to qualify for the inaugural college football playoff. Well, I mean, that's a holy bleep moment. and they dropped me in Columbus, Ohio with the Buckeyes, and they went on to win the national title that year with Joey Bosa and Ezekiel Elliott and Urban Meyer and Michael Thomas and Devin Smith, Raekwon McMillan and Josh Perry and all these dudes, just NFL dudes everywhere. And the rest is history. I've been blessed beyond words, and I'm just so full of gratitude.
Only team to beat Ohio State that year was Virginia Tech. Just want to point that out. All right.
No Hokies. You ain't wrong, Trey. Beat them on the road in Columbus, and they thought the sky was falling at that point. And ultimately what happened, Braxton Miller, the all-world quarterback that Ohio State had in 2012, led them to an undefeated season. They couldn't play in the postseason. Then in 2013, he was great. In 2014, they just knew it was on. And during camp, he blows his shoulder apart. And this freshman, JT Barrett, has to come in. And ultimately, if you guys are college football guys, a third-string quarterback named Cardale Jones led him to the national championship and wrote a movie script along the way.
Yeah, it was crazy indeed. And obviously, a big story in college football is realignment. It's happening right in the SEC with Texas and Oklahoma.
Is
Everything.
I haven't heard anything about that.
I know. It's like after Texas beat Alabama, it's mentioned 600 times. But everything happening in the Big Ten West. And I think I've heard this comparison before, but it really got me thinking, like, expansion in college football is very similar to the boom of NASCAR in the 2000s, where NASCAR tried to go after more of a national audience than relate it back to its base. Do you see those similarities in terms of how expansion is happening in college football compared to kind of the boom of NASCAR, and maybe how it could hurt the sport long term?
There are so many comparisons and so many variables that are comparable in those two things. That was like so NASCAR in that 97 to 2004 era was just the baddest ass thing on earth. And I was so awestruck just to get to be in it all the time and be around Jeff Gordon and Dale Earnhardt Jr. and all them boys, Jimmy, and live that every day. But what wound up happening was, in the name of big market television-centric entertainment, they left the deeply rooted soul of what built it. So you look at college football right now. What is the deeply rooted soul that built it? Rivalries, regional hatred for one another, and all that comes with that, the pageantry and the tradition. And of course, it's not just expansion, Trey. It's NIL, it's transfer portal, it's all the buzzwords right now. This massive confluence of change has resulted in the college football that I fell in love with, going to Virginia Tech games with my dad as a kid, is extinct. That college football doesn't exist anymore. It's a much more transient sport. And it's still beautiful. It's still amazing and awesome. And I can't believe I get to be in it. But it ain't Virginia Tech against West Virginia in 1988 at Lane Stadium when Major Harris came to town. I was 11 years old. My daddy took me, and it was the wildest thing I ever saw in my life. I think about 2 weeks after that, he took me to Martinsville, and that became the wildest thing I ever saw in my life. But nonetheless, yes, there are applicable comparisons between the approaches. And it's like McGee and I say this all the time. Be careful what you wish for.
For me, though, Marty, I live in Boise, Idaho. So all we have is Boise State.
Congratulations on your victory last weekend.
Good old
win, a slow start to the season, but
good old win against good old North Dakota, right? But like when I think of rivalries, I think of Oregon State, Washington State, USC, UCLA, and besides USC, UCLA, those are gone. I mean, Washington State doesn't have a home anymore. Oregon State doesn't have a home anymore. It feels like those rivalry games that you were talking about, they're going to be gone. Sure, we're going to have Alabama, Auburn still. I mean, that's Florida, Georgia still going to be there. But
Michigan and Ohio State. But
exactly,
I think the bigger one is Stillwater.
Yeah, Oklahoma State, Oklahoma, that's leaving too.
My my hope is that as this thing really comes into focus, might take a few years, but all right, so Texas and Texas A&M is going to be back. True. That's been gone for a while, and by God, they should be playing each other every year. There are certain games that should absolutely happen, and I hope, again, as all of this new comes into focus and we get entrenched within it and there's some sort of understood foundation, all those rivalry games will be reinstilled, because a college football without them is just an incomplete college football. It just is.
Yeah.
And that's what, again, it's what makes it so beautiful. What blew NASCAR up? What did it? Dale Earnhardt and Jeff Gordon. That's what did it. And when those two polar opposite personalities and had polar opposite fan bases, but both of them had such tremendous business acumen to realize it, it took NASCAR to places that sport never could have fathomed prior. And so rivalries and conflict are important for the greater good of the sports.
Marty Smith of ESPN joining us. He's releasing his new book, Sideline CEO, Leadership Principles from Championship Coaches. I want to dive into this book a little bit, Marty. I've read through about the first 70 pages, and when I was thinking of questions, I didn't even think of this question until I was about the second chapter in, when they were talking about leadership and then they were talking about trust. And one of the things I loved was the stories that Mack Brown was giving you. And I loved what he was talking about leadership. Leadership is when you turn a crisis into a positive. I love that quote. And then I loved his story about how he was talking about like what his players needed. They're like, well, we want 2 foosball tables. We want a brand new locker room. And he got it for him. And then he was like, okay, we got to make sure everything is clean. And it wasn't clean one day. And he's like, okay, either you clean it or we're going to fire the equipment manager. It's just like the in-depth stories that you got were so awesome. Just how did you develop a relationship with Mack Brown in order for those stories to come out?
Honestly, brother, he's like my dad.
Wow.
And not just me. Mack has that effect on nearly everyone with whom he chats. He has this amazing ability to connect. And when you meet someone who has that ability to connect the way Mack does, he has this talent for meeting you where you are. And there's just not a lot of people who have that. And when you look at his age and when you look at the young people that he's leading on a daily basis, think about that discrepancy. And he's always able to meet them where they are. And he's been that way with me since the second I met him. He's just an amazing, indomitable soul. And that you haven't real that like that stuff you're talking about is great, but wait until you get to the crisis management stories he shared with me and the evolution stories he shared with me about who he was as a younger coach and a younger man. Had he experienced some of the situations he experienced as an older, more seasoned coach and a more mature man, he would have ruined it. Because he would have just got mad at somebody and wrote them off. Rather than having the understanding of, let me meet them where they are, let me demand of them to be great, but let me meet them where they are. And I will just tell you, one of those stories is Vince Young. One of those stories is Vince Young, who's one of the greatest college football players of all time.
Easily.
And Vince was not having a good way. Vince was not playing well. He was sulking. He was coming over to the sideline and not being a great teammate. So Coach Brown benched him. Put Chance Mock in. If you guys remember the name Chance Mock. And he said, you're going to be the best teammate to Chance Mock. We're going to win this football game. And then next week at practice, you're going to have to show me. He had a terrible week of practice. Went out during pregame warmups against Texas Tech. Couldn't even throw it in the ocean. Coach is like, well, I guess this is over. But he started him. And what did Vince Young do? He went for, I don't know the exact numbers. It's in the text of the book. He went for like 250 and 200 on the ground. Jeez. And the rest was history. And Mack admitted to me, in a previous life, I'd have just benched him. I'd have been mad at him. I'd have said, sit over there and are you done? But that's not like he had evolved as a human being and as a leader. And all Vince Young did was give Mack a damn championship ring. So it's really interesting. I mean, I don't know. It's my book. I'm biased, but it's interesting stuff.
Speaking of Hall of Fame coaches, I think Coach Beamer to me is the man. Like going to Virginia Tech, being a Virginia Tech fan my whole life, like, and you obviously are from Galax, Virginia, Southwest Virginia, represent. I think both of us understand the impact that Frank Beamer has. Talk about like being able to write about him in this book, and then the fact like this is you already talked on about going to Lane Stadium as a kid. Like I remember my first time interacting with him, I'm like, holy bleep, this is Frank Beamer. Like I've been watching this guy.
I'm still that way, Trey.
Same.
I mean, I've been blessed in this life and in this job to interact with and interview and be around some of the greatest icons of our time throughout the world of sport. I still look at Coach Beamer and I'm just like, I can't believe that I am with him, because my sweetest memories with my father live in Lane Stadium, and I feel closer to my dad today in Lane Stadium than I do anywhere. If I want to feel my father's energy, I lost Daddy in 2008, but if I want to feel his energy and I'm going home, I don't go to his gravesite. I go to that football stadium, Jack. And Frank Beamer is a direct conduit to those memories with my dad. And so he's so special to me. And Shane is like my brother. I mean, I think all y'all know how close Shane and I are. We grew up playing everything against each other.
Old classic Galax versus Blacksburg games, I know.
He's just an amazing person. And I'll show you in a minute, but a couple years ago, for whatever reason, the Roanoke Times did this 20 most influential people in sports or something from the footprint of the newspaper, I think is what it was. And my name was like one slot ahead of Coach Beamer's name. And I thought, these people have got to back that truck back up now. That's just wrong. And he sent me the article. And he sent me this amazing football helmet, which I'll show y'all in a minute. And this letter that came with it was all about my spirit, was all about my passion, was all about how deeply impressive it is to him that I still carry every single day Parisburg and Giles County with me everywhere I go. And I say this a lot, fellas. No matter where my branches may extend or reach, I'm rooted in Appalachia, in Giles County, Virginia. And that's just the truth. And so I don't care if you go to Spokane or you go to Bangor, Maine, or you go to Albuquerque or you go to Clearwater, Florida. You know where Blacksburg is. And the reason is Frank Beamer and what he built with Virginia Tech football. And so, yeah, he's, as you can tell, super special to me. And he's awesome in the book, man. That crisis management chapter, I know, Bryan, you haven't gotten to it yet, brother, but the stories in there are holy smokes. And Coach walks me step by step through the 2007 campus shooting. Wow. And how the university basically called him and requested that he put the entire university on his shoulders, and because he was the face of the school. And everyone looked at him as the guy who has the answers. And as a leader, you're supposed to be the person that has the answers even when there are no answers. And he talks about standing in front of those parents and those families that day and delivering a message. And I'm not going to give away any more, but man, I mean, like, just a special person, just such a special person.
I literally want to read chapter 6 now. Like, I'm literally going to come home after work and read 3 more chapters just so I can get to chapter 6. You've already convinced me of that, my man.
There's some good storytelling. Wait till you guys see what Doc Rivers shared step by step, the entire aftermath of being the coach and general manager of the LA Clippers when Donald Sterling said all those terrible racist remarks. And I mean, Doc is a very honest, forward, direct person, and his vulnerability in that passage, what an amazing man and leader.
This is Austin Dillon, driver of the Bass Pro Shops Chevrolet. Make sure to hit that subscribe button. Also check out one of those 2 videos beside me. Visit frontstretch.com for more racing content.